house was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, as if it was holding its breath. I stood in the kitchen, my hands resting on the cold edge of the counter, listening to the sound of my own breathing. It sounded too loud, everything did. The clock on the wall ticked with an impatience that made my chest tighten, each second pressing against me like a reminder that something in my life was slipping out of place. Marriage is not destroyed in one loud moment. It fades slowly, softly, almost politely. There was a time when this house carried laughter, when footsteps meant warmth, and silence meant rest. Now, silence felt like judgment, like a question I was afraid to answer. I used to believe that love was built on honesty, that if two people shared a bed, a future, and a name, they shared the same truth. I was wrong. Truth does not always leave marks. Sometimes it hides behind familiar smiles, warm dinners, and conversations that feel complete, but are missing something essential. My husband still kissed me goodbye every morning. His lips still found my cheek, gentle and careful, too careful, as if he was afraid of leaving a trace of himself behind, as if affection had become a routine rather than a desire. I noticed the change before I understood it. The way his eyes no longer searched for mine when he entered a room. The way his laughter felt delayed, like he was borrowing it from somewhere else. At night, his body lay beside mine, but his thoughts were always far away, drifting toward a place I could not follow. I told myself this was normal, that marriages grow quiet with time, that passion matures into responsibility, that distance is not always loss. I repeated these lies until they became comfortable. My mother used to visit often. She had always been a presence in our lives, warm and familiar, like a piece of furniture you never question because it has always been there. She still carried a youthfulness that people noticed, not loudly, but in the way conversations slowed when she entered a room, in the way strangers listened when she spoke. I never saw her as a threat. The thought would have felt absurd. She was my mother, the woman who taught me how to braid my hair, who held my hand when I cried, who told me that love should feel safe. When she sat across from my husband at the dinner table, I saw nothing unusual, just conversation, shared laughter, long eye contact that I explained away as politeness, familiarity. Sometimes I would catch them talking in low voices in the living room while I cleaned the dishes. Their words blended into a soft murmur, intimate but harmless, I told myself. I trusted both of them with the same blind faith. Why would I not? Trust, when given freely, rarely expects to be betrayed. The first crack appeared on an ordinary afternoon. I was folding laundry in the bedroom when I noticed his phone light up on the nightstand. A message preview appeared briefly before disappearing. I did not read it. I did not need to. Something about the way he reacted when he came back into the room stayed with me. He reached for the phone too quickly. His smile was too quick as well, like a mask adjusted in a hurry. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing deepen into sleep. I wondered when we had stopped sharing our thoughts before sleep claimed us. When silence had replaced confession, I began to question myself instead. Maybe I had changed. Maybe I was no longer interesting. Maybe marriage had turned me invisible. I started watching more closely. Not out of suspicion at first, but out of confusion. I noticed how his mood lifted after my mother left the house. How he seemed distracted before her visits, restless, pacing, checking the time. How her laughter lingered in the rooms long after she was gone. There was a warmth between them that did not include me. Not openly, not obviously, but enough to make me feel like a guest in my own home. Still, I said nothing. Because confronting the truth requires courage, and I was not ready to lose what I still believed I had. I clung to routine. Morning coffee, shared meals, casual conversations about work and weather. I told myself that if I kept everything steady, whatever was shifting beneath the surface would correct itself. But the human heart does not correct itself. It drifts toward what feeds it. The night everything truly began to unravel was quiet. Too quiet. My mother had stayed later than usual. The house was dim, shadows stretching across the walls like unspoken thoughts. I remember standing in the hallway, hearing their voices from the living room, low and close. I stopped walking, not because I heard something wrong, but because I felt something break. There was an intimacy in their silence between words, a pause that did not belong to me. I stood there, unseen, holding my breath, suddenly aware that I was standing at the edge of a truth I was not prepared to face. In that moment, I understood something painful and irreversible. Some betrayals do not announce themselves, they wait, and when they reveal themselves, they take everything with them. The days that followed moved forward as if nothing had changed, yet everything had. Once awareness settles into the body, it does not leave. It hums beneath the skin, sharp and restless. I woke each morning with a heaviness in my chest, as though I had been holding my breath all night without realizing it. I watched my husband differently now, not with accusation, but with attention. I studied the small movements I used to ignore. The way his shoulders tightened when my mother called. The way his voice softened when he spoke her name. The way his patience with me had grown thin, while his patience with her seemed endless. He listened to her stories as if they mattered more than the life we had built together. When I spoke, he nodded. When she spoke, he leaned forward. I felt foolish for noticing, even more foolish for feeling hurt. I reminded myself again and again that love can take many forms, that respect does not always look the same, that imagination can be cruel when fed by fear. Still, my body did not believe my reasoning. At night I lay beside him, my back turned, pretending to sleep while my thoughts replayed the smallest moments of the day. A glance held a second too long. A laugh that lingered. A pause that carried weight. I wanted to ask him if he was happy. The question lived at the back of my throat, heavy and sharp. But I was afraid of the answer. Afraid that happiness had begun to exist somewhere I could not reach. My mother called more often now. She asked about him, as much as she asked about me. Sometimes more. Her concern felt gentle, almost loving, yet something in it unsettled me. I began to feel like a bridge between two people who no longer needed me to connect them. One afternoon, I invited her to stay for tea. I watched the way my husband reacted when I told him. His face lit up before he could stop it. He tried to hide it, but joy is difficult to disguise when it arrives uninvited. That afternoon I observed them closely. I watched how they mirrored each other's movements, how silence between them felt comfortable, shared. How I became the one filling gaps, forcing conversation, reminding myself that this was my family, my life. I excused myself to the kitchen at one point, needing air, needing distance. As I poured tea into cups, my hands trembled, not from anger, from grief. Grief for something I could feel slipping away but could not yet name. When I returned, they stopped talking. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I sat down slowly, placing the cups on the table, aware of how my presence shifted the energy. I felt like an interruption rather than a participant, like a door closing instead of opening. That night, after my mother left, I asked him if everything was all right. My voice was calm, to calm. The kind of calm that comes from exhaustion. He smiled and said yes. That smile did not reach his eyes. I turned away before he could see mine fill with tears. I did not want him to know how fragile I felt. I did not want to give him proof that I was losing something he had already let go of. The next few weeks blurred together. My mother's visits continued. My husband's distance grew. I began to feel like I was living with echoes instead of people. Their laughter rang louder in my memory than in the present moment, and I found myself bracing for pain I could not yet explain. One evening, I returned home earlier than expected. The house was quiet, except for voices coming from the living room. I paused in the doorway, my heart pounding, not because I expected to see something wrong, but because part of me feared seeing nothing at all. They sat close, not touching, not doing anything that could be named or accused. Yet something in the way they leaned toward each other felt intimate, chosen. Their conversation stopped when they noticed me. Again, the silence was immediate. Heavy, guilty in a way that words could not disguise. I smiled. I always smiled. Later that night, alone in the bathroom, I looked at my reflection for a long time. I searched my face for answers. I wondered when I had become the kind of woman who doubted her own place in her marriage. I wondered if love can leave quietly, without explanation, without warning. I remembered my mother's words from years ago, that love should feel safe, that trust should feel steady, that marriage is built on respect. I pressed my hands against the sink and felt something inside me harden. I realized that even if I did not yet understand what was happening, I could no longer ignore how it made me feel. Pain does not require proof to be real. Fear does not wait for permission. That night, lying in bed beside my husband, I knew something had changed forever. I just did not yet know how deep the wound would go. I began to notice how easily I disappeared from my own life. It was not dramatic. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, no accusations thrown across the room. Instead, it was quiet, subtle, the kind of quiet that erodes you slowly, until one day you realize you are no longer standing where you used to be. My husband spoke less to me now. When he did, his words felt careful, filtered, as if he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. Not because he feared hurting me, but because he feared revealing himself. Conversations became functional, necessary, devoid of warmth. How was your day? Did you eat? What time will you be home? We moved around each other like polite strangers who shared a lease rather than a life. My mother, on the other hand, seemed closer than ever. She knew details about his work I had not heard. She asked questions that suggested familiarity, not curiosity. Sometimes she finished his sentences. When she did, he smiled without thinking. That smile stayed with me long after the moment passed. I tried to talk to her once, not directly. I asked how she was feeling, whether she was lonely, whether she missed companionship. She laughed softly and said she felt alive, that this stage of her life surprised her. She did not look at me when she said it. I felt something tighten in my chest. A warning I did not want to hear. There is a strange cruelty in being surrounded by the people you trust most, yet feeling completely alone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask them both what was happening, but I was afraid that naming it would make it real, permanent, irreversible, so I waited. Waiting is what people do when they are afraid of losing everything at once. The breaking point did not arrive in anger. It arrived in exhaustion. One evening, my husband came home late. He said there had been a long conversation. He did not say with whom. I did not ask. I knew. My body knew before my mind could catch up. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, careful not to wake him. My tears felt heavy, bitter, like they had been waiting for permission to fall. I realized I was mourning something that was still technically mine. Love, when it is dying, does not scream, it withdraws. The next day, I found myself searching for confirmation. Not because I wanted to hurt myself, but because uncertainty had become unbearable. I needed to know if my pain had a shape, a reason, a truth. I did not go through his phone. I did not follow him. I did not confront my mother. Instead, I listened. I listened to what was said and what was carefully avoided. I listened to the tone in their voices when they spoke to each other. I listened to the way my name felt absent from their conversations, even when I was present. I began to feel like a child watching adults share a secret. The moment that shattered what little denial I had left came unexpectedly. My mother touched his arm while laughing at something he said. It was brief, light, almost nothing, but it was familiar. Too familiar. My breath caught, my heart raced. The room tilted slightly, as if my body was trying to reject what my eyes had just witnessed. He did not pull away. He did not notice me watching. In that moment, clarity arrived without mercy. I was not imagining things. I felt something inside me collapse. Not loudly, not violently. It simply gave way, like a structure that had been weakened over time and could no longer support its own weight. I excused myself and went to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands, wondering how something so wrong could exist so quietly. I thought of my childhood, of my mother's embrace, of the safety I associated with her presence. I thought of my wedding day, of the vows my husband had spoken, his voice steady, his eyes locked on mine. I realized that betrayal does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who taught you how to trust. That night, I did not sleep. I lay awake, staring into darkness, replaying every memory, every interaction, every moment that now carried a different meaning. I felt anger rise, then guilt, then shame, all tangled together. I wondered what I had done wrong, when I had stopped being enough. Why the two people who should have protected me had instead found comfort in each other. By morning, something inside me had changed. I was no longer just hurt. I was awake. I woke before the sun, my body heavy but my mind sharp in a way it had never been before. There is a moment after deep pain when everything becomes clear, almost painfully so. The fog lifts, not gently, but all at once. You see the shape of your life without the softness you once used to survive it. I moved through the house quietly. The walls felt unfamiliar, like they belonged to someone else. Every object carried memory, and every memory now carried a second meaning. I stood in the kitchen and watched light creep through the window, wondering how many mornings had begun like this without me knowing what was already ending. When my husband woke, he greeted me as he always did. Calm, casual, careful. His voice held the comfort of habit, not intimacy. I watched him drink his coffee, watched the way he avoided my eyes, and I knew I could no longer pretend that silence was protection. Later that day, my mother came by unannounced. I felt my chest tighten when I heard her voice. She smiled when she saw me, warm and familiar, the same smile that had once meant safety. Now it felt rehearsed. We sat together in the living room, the three of us. The space between us felt charged, stretched thin by everything that had not yet been spoken. My hands rested in my lap, still steady. I was surprised by my own calm. I asked a simple question, one that did not accuse, did not shout, did not tremble. I asked when honesty had stopped being important. They looked at each other before they looked at me. That was the answer. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was no longer empty. It was full, heavy with truth that could no longer hide. My husband opened his mouth, then closed it again. My mother's eyes filled with tears that arrived too late to mean innocence. I listened as they spoke. Not all at once, not clearly. Pieces, justifications. Confessions wrapped in shame, words about connection, about loneliness, about how it was never meant to happen, about how it did not start the way it ended. I did not interrupt. I felt strangely distant from my own body, as if I were watching another woman absorb the destruction of her world. A woman who looked like me, who sounded like me, but who was already changing into someone else. What hurt the most was not the betrayal of my marriage. It was the betrayal of my history. The realization that the woman who raised me had crossed a line that could never be erased. That the man who promised to protect me had chosen desire over loyalty. That love had been traded for secrecy, and trust for comfort. I did not scream. I did not cry. I stood up. In that moment, I understood something powerful and terrifying. That staying silent would destroy me faster than leaving ever could. That forgiveness without accountability is another form of self-abandonment. I told them I needed space. Not to think, not to decide, but to breathe without feeling like I was suffocating in their shared guilt. That night, alone in a room that no longer felt like home, I allowed myself to grieve, not just the marriage, not just the relationship with my mother, but the woman I had been before all of this. The woman who believed that love was always safe when it came from family. I cried for her, and then, slowly, I let her go. Because in her place stood someone new. Someone who understood that betrayal can come wrapped in familiarity. That strength sometimes begins with loss. That choosing yourself is not cruelty, but survival. By morning, I knew this was not the end of my story. It was the moment it finally became mine.